welcome to Tech Talks, the People and Planet podcast. Today on the show, we're joined by Adam Stansell, the CEO of Axel Health. Hey, Adam. Nice to meet you. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you for joining us. So you guys are all about in-home care, aren't you? And workforce management, that sort of thing. It's a unique one for us on the show. Tell us a little bit more about it. What's the problem that you guys solve with the mission? Perhaps the inspiration as well.
Yeah. So at a very high level, there's a massive shortage of clinicians in all of healthcare in the U.S., but certainly in the home healthcare space as well. And part of the issue there is just that a lot of these home healthcare providers, they're not using best-in-class logistics technology. They're using a lot of manual techniques and maybe some technology is a little bit outdated. And the result is that a lot of these clinicians, these home healthcare clinicians, spend most of their day sitting in cars, driving, to and from patients, but not actually spending time with patients. And so, technology we built is basically trying to solve that logistics problem for these home healthcare providers, make sure that, we can bring them up to the level of like an Uber and Amazon, these companies that have, really best in class logistics algorithms that are driving, all of their behavior. Obviously still keeping a heavy focus on the clinical side and making sure that, clinicians are spending, as much time as possible with patients, really just trying to focus on reducing that drive time and helping them see as many patients as possible.
Got it. Okay. So this is about making their lives as easy as possible so they can actually do what they're supposed to be doing, which is looking after patients, right?
Right. Nobody wants to spend all their time in their car, right? And so, for us talking to folks in this space, there's a lot of, well, I love seeing my patients, but I hate being in traffic. And, that makes sense because if you're, if you're using just kind of like a very basic routing algorithm or even, no routing algorithm at all, the odds are you're going to spend most of your time driving around instead of actually, spending your time giving care to patients. And so when we, come into a new client, one of these our technology does, we allow them to really focus on, hey, how do we make sure that you're spending as much time as possible in home with these patients as opposed to sitting in your car driving?
Got it. So how does it work then? The app itself, is it, is it comparable to a sort of the UX of like an Uber sort of thing?
Yeah, so it's obviously healthcare is very different, and so we've had to extract a lot of the technology away out of that kind of individual modality. We do have 3 user-facing components. So there's a mobile app for clinicians that they use when they're out in the field. There's some like patient tooling, so mostly SMS-based stuff, just texting to help patients with scheduling and reminders and communications and all that stuff. And then there's an operations dashboard for office teams to help them kind of give visibility real time into their actual operations and obviously help with all the scheduling and everything else. But the core of it is really the logistics algorithm. And so we spent a lot of time building out our own proprietary technology around that logistics algorithm that'll help optimize clinicians' routes. We basically start with taking all the historical data from our clients and what is the historical visit density within a given geography. We're then using that to predict out future visit density based on not only historical data but also trends that we're seeing in space and trends within specific geographies and everything else. We're then marrying that up against real-time traffic data from the Google Maps API and using that to kind of predict, hey, given the set of visits we expect to occur, what is the optimal configuration for those visits? And then the last piece we do, we're actually threading that together into multiple different interfaces that the patients can use to schedule. So they can actually self-schedule themselves, or you can have the clinicians or the office teams handle the scheduling on behalf of the patients. We're basically trying to take all of that, like basically the logistics side of things, that's kind of a black box algorithm, and then displaying it in multiple different interfaces to make sure that patients are getting care when they need it, right? They've got certain time constraints and everything else. But then on the back end, it's all kind of powered by these logistics algorithms that are making it as efficient as possible.
I like it. Okay. So what's the actual results then? You give us some percentages.
Yeah. So, ideally, when we're going into a new client, we're looking at a 20% increase in the number of patients their clinicians can see. And that's 20% more time with patients, right? That's not reducing the time spent in home with the patient. Same time at home with the patient, we're just getting to 20% more patients because we're reducing that drive time by, 30, 40, even 50% sometimes. And so, when we go into a new client, it's basically, hey, chances are you've had a hard time hiring clinicians. Chances are you've got patients sitting on your wait list that are, waiting to be seen that you haven't been able to get to. We'll help you see 20% more patients with your same pool of clinicians you currently have today.
Nice. And I guess this works multiple ways as well, because I speak to a lot of companies that are dealing with the problem of burnt out healthcare workers.
Mm-hmm.
And then signing up, they sign up to look after patients, they sign up to do healthcare, but they end up doing admin or driving around or doing things that are not related to the job they signed up to. So this is some way going towards solving that as well.
Totally. I mean, that was kind of the genesis of the company, right? When we started the company, it was early COVID. And one of the dominant themes of the time was how burnt out clinicians were, right? And how, we already had this massive staffing shortage. Now you had this global pandemic that was just making everybody's lives miserable, and especially those clinicians that were, pulling 12-plus-hour days and, trying to find ways to kind of keep the healthcare system intact. It was a massive problem. And so, that core issue of, well, how can we ensure that people, like their jobs, they're enjoying it, they're getting to do what they signed up to do. Obviously there's all kinds of admin work that people don't like doing, documentation and, approvals and all kinds of stuff that's really painful. But the most painful of it is just sitting stuck in traffic for 45 minutes, right? There's nothing more painful than that. And so for us, we went in, we said, hey, these clinicians are scarce, they're valuable, they want to deliver care, and they need to utilize their time as efficiently as possible. How can we help bring some of what we've learned in our, in our past lives and prior experience to the table?
So I was going to ask that actually, around you brought around the pandemic time, did that situation surrounding the pandemic, did that kind of speed up things for you?
It did a lot of things for us. So obviously the first piece of it, there was a lot of care that started moving out of traditional brick and mortar settings into the home. And we've seen the trend continue. Obviously, there's just a lot of momentum around taking people out of these centralized care settings where, they're very good for some things, but they're also not good for others. You had a lot of people getting sick in hospitals, right? And there's all kinds of issues that, came out of having all that centralized care. And so we saw a real trend towards, home healthcare and getting people out of the hospital into the home. But obviously, being a startup during the COVID pandemic, there are all kinds of other issues that came with that, right? At first it was very difficult because, the world was changing and nobody really knew what to expect. We then went through, kind of an insane heater of 2021 and, first part of 2022 where markets were just wild. And, I would argue the incentives are a little bit misaligned. There are a lot of startups that were focused exclusively on growth and kind of growth at all costs and how do we optimize for that. And obviously 2023 was a massive correction, right? And people had to get back to business fundamentals and get back to their basics. And so we kind of lived that whole life cycle, right? Started during that early stage when, the world was very uncertain. We survived the boom times, and then, luckily we got some good advice early on as the market was starting to correct around, hey, focus on the fundamentals, get the business back to a good, stable burn and stable position. Luckily we were actually able to get profitable at one point last year before we started hiring again. So, we were able to take that advice to heart. But it's definitely a challenge. The market changed in pretty drastic ways. And there are a lot of good companies that were tuned for that earlier phase of, growth at all costs. And it's really hard to kind of re-optimize your business around an entirely new set of standards. And, for us, we were lucky that we got to it early and we're able to, kind of cross over that break-even line last year and find our footing, fully and completely. But there's a lot of companies in there are still struggling to manage that.
Yeah, good advice as well, though. I think business fundamentals is certainly something that I saw as a recruiter, perhaps, in the kind of, the big euphoric days of 22, perhaps. We need 20 engineers, we need 30 engineers, but growth. Yeah. And then, that all changed last year, as you know.
Yep.
So what about your own story, Adam? What's your background? How did you arrive here?
Yeah. What am I doing in healthcare? Very high level. I went to Columbia in New York for undergrad, studied econ and math, worked in consulting for a couple of years after that. Some healthcare consulting, some kind of more general operation consulting. I then joined Uber back when Uber Eats was first getting launched. So I got to launch Uber Eats in a bunch of markets in the Northeast US and just do a lot of really cool business building, I would say. Obviously the early Uber days were kind of marked by, a lot of autonomy and a lot of ability to build new businesses. So I learned a ton about logistics and about, getting people around the city and kind of, handling the kind of real world side of things. But also, building an actual business by myself and getting to spin up these new markets and making sure everything kind of worked. And again, those kind of fundamentals were in place. So did that for a while. Eventually moved to the strategy team out of HQ in San Francisco. And then right after the IPO, I joined another company called Motive in the Bay. They also do like logistics tech and kind of in that same vein, like real world problems and kind of physical goods and moving things around the city. And then COVID happened, and so we had this idea for hey, can we bring some of that best in class logistics tech from other spaces into healthcare and solve some of these problems that we're seeing there. We applied to Y Combinator, which is a big accelerator out of San Francisco, and got accepted, joined YC, and here we are.
So did you have any kind of knowledge of healthcare previous?
Yeah, so I did some consulting in healthcare back, when I was in my in my post undergrad days. I will say that the healthcare technology space is very different from the type of work you do in healthcare consulting. When I was consulting, we were spending a lot of time working with very large organizations that have large organization problems, right? They tend to be focused on optimizing spend across different functions and some of the similar things you see with public companies that are dealing with some of the quarterly earnings cycle and everything else. Working in healthcare technology, we still obviously have to worry about the fundamentals, but for us, it's much more about how can we build products that are really tailored towards solving for patients' needs and for clinicians' needs, and how can we make sure that we are reducing costs in the system as a whole and making the system more efficient. And so it's much more about direct value creation as opposed to some of the kind of optimization stuff I did in consulting. Obviously it was a good background. You can get a good kind of perspective on the industry as a whole and how the different pieces play together. But I found that obviously the day-to-day for me is very different now than it was back then.
Yeah, I can imagine. What comes next? What's can you share that's going to be exciting for our audience?
Yeah. So we just announced a new round of funding, total of 4.2 million. The initial piece of that, thank you. The initial piece of that was led by Pear VC out of the Bay, with some follow-on funding led by Track VC. So now we're hiring software engineers, machine learning engineers, and my focus is really on just hiring and then building. Our goal is to get the technology into the hands of as many home healthcare providers as possible, and so we're going to keep hiring and make sure we can do that.
Absolutely. Adam, thank you very much for joining us. That's all we've got time for, but it's been an absolute pleasure.
Of course. Thanks, Lee.
Adam Stansell from Axel Health. Cheers.